Go. Hello, hello, hello. So let's just take a second and wait for all of the attendees to jump in. And yeah, we had a lovely discussion here in the waiting room, and we can continue that in a second just to wait for everybody to jump in. So we're expecting a bunch of you to show up here as attendees. We're really blown away with the interest, and of course the webinar, the workshop, the hands-on workshop we did in January was so much fun, and so blown away by your feedback that we just said, let's do it again. And here we are for February, officially. Also want to say hello and welcome to the second SecOps Bindplane hands-on workshop. And I'm super thrilled to see so many of you joining today as well. We have an awesome demo. So Denton is eager to jump into the demo, but you're going to have to put up with listening to myself and Ryan for a few minutes before we jump into that. And yeah, I'll be your host. I'm Adnan. I'm the developer relations lead here at Bindplane. And today with me, I have Denton, Ryan, and Travis from the team. And yeah, from the get-go, obviously, I want to hand over the microphone to our own superstar, Denton first.
Hey guys, great to have you all join. As Adnan said, really excited to get into all of this today. I'm a Denton Kreitz sales engineer here at Bindplane, and I'll be handling the demo portion. So hand it over to Ryan.
Hey y'all, thanks so much for joining. I'm Ryan Goins, I lead product here. As you guys are asking questions throughout the workshop, I'm going to be paying close attention to any feedback you guys have. Certainly if you've already started using Bindplane. If you haven't joined our Slack community, would love you to do so, and feel free to DM me there anytime. Happy to jump on calls and just learn about how you're using Bindplane and get any feedback from you I can.
And hi, my name's Travis. I'm in the QA department over here. So I spend a lot of time in support. So if you open up a support chat lately, you may have talked to me. I'm going to be looking at the QA questions as well. Thanks for having me.
Sweet. And yeah, just to confirm, everybody sees the slide deck. You can raise your hand if you do. So we don't have there we go. Wonderful. So we don't have the same hiccup as last time. Yeah, so let's just jump right in. So with the intros out of the way, we have a short little agenda for today for the next roughly hour or so. So we're obviously going to do a quick rundown on Bindplane telemetry pipelines in general. We'll also talk a bit about the Bindplane architecture overview, just so you're aware of how everything works, how everything is interconnected. We'll also talk a bit about OpAmp, what it is, how it works, why it's important for this use case. And then obviously the bread and butter of the whole workshop is obviously going to be Denton walking you through a hands-on demo of using Bindplane with Google SecOps. It's going to be slightly different than last time, so we're going to have some new really, really cool things to show you this time. And yeah, you're obviously, we have a dedicated section at the end for questions, but do feel free to drop questions along the way. We can surely just pause the demo or just cut off and discuss any interesting questions along the way as well. So don't feel as if you have to wait for the end. And of course, if you miss parts of the demo, if you can't stay for the full hour, there will be a recording. So once we get the recording processed by Zoom, we're going to put it out on our YouTube channel tomorrow. So don't worry about missing anything. You'll always be able to look at the recording tomorrow as well. And yeah, with that, we can jump into a quick intro on what is Bindplane. So the easy way to say, or the simple way of explaining it, is it's an OpenTelemetry native telemetry pipeline. Now, what does that mean per se? So the core functionality is to provide a actually a unified platform to route, monitor, and manage your telemetry data. And that means basically route from whatever source to whatever destination. And this makes it super easy to both collect your telemetry data, but also process and export it because it's built on vendor agnostic OpenTelemetry standards. So you are 100% not going to be vendor locked with whatever you're using here. And we also aim to simplify managing a fleet of collectors so that your telemetry infrastructure becomes much more easier to manage at scale. And of course, all of these things boil down into efficiency as well, especially cost efficiency, meaning that it just makes it super easy to reduce your costs just because you have this easy access to processors and ways to reduce the amount of telemetry that you are exporting. Now, some little intro about the Bindplane editions as well. We did have some questions last time about how the Bindplane editions differ as well. So Ryan is going to take you through a quick overview of what that means, and also what that means for Google specifically, and also for non-Google editions as well.
Yeah, so just a quick update on some of our offerings. So we've had a really great and close relationship with Google for many years now, and many of you might have been using our Bindplane Google Edition. The Bindplane Google Edition is available to all Google Cloud Observability and SecOps users. And this is great for managing your OTel fleet, collecting your telemetry, and shipping it to any Google destination. The new edition that we've recently introduced is Bindplane Enterprise Google Edition. And so this is our full enterprise product. It's going to let you do data reduction, PII masking, all of the advanced processing you can do in Bindplane Enterprise, you can do with Bindplane Enterprise Google Edition. And then it will allow you to route that data again to any Google destination. So that version is available for any SecOps Enterprise Plus customers. So if you're using SecOps Enterprise Plus, you will have access to that edition of Bindplane at no additional cost. If you need to send data to other destinations beyond just a Google destination, then that's where you'd want to talk to us about the full Bindplane Enterprise edition. Or if you're not currently an Enterprise Plus customer, same thing, we can talk to you about Bindplane Enterprise and unlock some of those data reduction capabilities and, of course, sending to non-Google destinations.
Yeah, this is a very nice rundown because we had some questions last time about this, and I think this was very useful to just cover at the beginning of the workshop. And yeah, moving from the additions into the architecture, we can just do a quick rundown of what the architecture generally looks like. This overview is using Bindplane Cloud, just because Denton is going to demo actually run the demo with Bindplane Cloud, but it would be very similar, almost identical if you were running Bindplane or self-hosted Bindplane. Of course, the feature sets would be the same as well, so no differences there. So just to go through the components that we see. So the middle part are the collectors, which are responsible for gathering all of the telemetry data from your systems. So this is in your network. On the left, we have the control plane, and that's the central control plane that manages and monitors your collectors. And then the connection between these two are used, or actually goes through the op-amp protocol. Now, to explain this in a bit more detail, what Bindplane essentially does is that it helps manage the telemetry throughput by letting you configure multiple collectors super easy, which means that it's OpenTelemetry native, and it's using something that we call Bindplane Distro for OpenTelemetry Collector. Well, we call it short, the BDOT collector, and that's literally a version of the upstream OpenTelemetry Collector. So it is forked from the OpenTelemetry contrib collector repository. The only real difference is that it supports op-amp out of the box, and we will be discussing this a bit more moving forward. But the only thing that you need to know for now is that the BDOT collector, you only need to run one single install script per machine you're installing this on. And right now we support managing roughly 250,000 collectors with Bindplane. And of course, this number is just growing. We're targeting 500,000 very soon, so Ryan can confirm that. And yeah, the collector supports roughly around 80 sources and around 40 destinations right now. So you can receive and export telemetry to and from multiple destinations and sources at the same time with the same config. So it's very, very flexible in what you can do with the collector. It also supports retry and persistent queuing, meaning that if an export fails, you can cache it, or actually it automatically caches, and then we'll send that that log event or metric after the fact. Yeah, it's the only collector right now that has op-amp built in. And yeah, and about op-amp, it's actually, the full name is Open Agent Management Protocol, and it's designed for managing large fleets of collectors. Makes it easy to have centralized updates, push out configurations, and just monitor your collectors overall. And the way this works is that it's actually the collector that initiates the op-amp connection with Bindplane Cloud or Bindplane, the server itself, whether you're using self-hosted or cloud. It does this through a WebSocket connection. So you only need an outbound firewall rule. So from the actual network that you're running the collector on, you need an outbound rule. If it's Bindplane Cloud, then it's 443, and you have to open the port 443. If it's on-prem, then it's 3001 or 3001. So it's security-wise, it's very, very easy and very flexible to set up. And it's also super easy to migrate collectors between using Bindplane Cloud and on-prem, because you just change the op-amp endpoint that you're using once actually installing the collector. So it's very flexible that way as well. And then, yeah, lastly, on the left side, discussing the control plane. What Bindplane does is that it essentially shows you a preview of the telemetry flowing through your network. But this telemetry, it's never stored in Bindplane per se. So the telemetry only flows through the collectors, where you get a snapshot of the telemetry in Bindplane, so in the Bindplane web UI, because it's stored in the browser cache. So we store no telemetry in Bindplane itself. So if you have any very strict data privacy laws, or like things like GDPR, we can adhere to those very easily, just because we don't actually store any telemetry ourselves. And yeah, this also means that processing of the actual log events or metrics or traces, it's all done in the collectors themselves. So it's not happening in Bindplane. Bindplane only manages and pushes out configs and gives you an easy way to preview the telemetry if you want to do transformations, processing, etc. Now, with all of this out of the way, I think we can hand it over to Denton, unless we have some questions to do a quick pause here. Let's take a second to see. Yeah, I think we can just continue with having Denton do the demo, and the three of us can sit around and answer questions in the QA.
Cool. Sounds good.
Yeah, let me stop sharing and let me pop over to let Denton screen share.
Awesome.
Nice.
You guys seeing the Bindplane login?
Yep, all good.
Perfect. Cool. So quick high-level agenda for what we've got to do, and we've got a lot to cover. We're going to sign up for a brand new Bindplane SaaS instance. We're doing that just to show how quick and easy it is to get that done. I'm going to install the Bindplane Collector on a single Linux machine. That's going to act as our data plane. That's what's going to ingest the data, process the data, and ultimately send the data over to SecOps. Yeah, and then we'll go through some custom processors that we can use to make sure that data is in good shape and ready to go once it reaches SecOps. So let's get going. Like I said, I am going to go ahead and sign up for a brand new account just to make it nice and, again, show how quick it is. Put in my username, put in a password. I'm going to continue. Awesome. I'm going to pull up my email here off to the side. I've already got my verification email, so that's great. I'm going to copy this link. Go in. We're good. Awesome. So Just that easy. We're ready to get going. I'm going to give it an org name. So the organization is sort of that top level structure within Bindplane. We can have projects underneath it for like different teams and so forth, but we're going to start with our top level organization. We're going to accept the EULA and get started. Just that easy. We've got a Bindplane SaaS instance up and running, ready to go. Of course, there's nothing in it. There's no agents connected. There's no configuration at this point. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we have to install our agent. And you're going to hear throughout this, I'm probably going to switch between using the term agent as well as collector. Obviously, the UI says agent, but we like to sort of also indicate that the word agent comes with a lot of baggage. People are expecting a very particular thing when you say agent. They're expecting that you need to roll this out to every machine in your environment to collect any data. And yes, you absolutely can install our collector as a traditional agent on your Windows endpoints, Windows servers, Linux servers, etc. But actually in this particular demo, I'm going to be installing it as a Syslog receiver. So the data that it's going to be collecting is not originating from the server that it's running on. It's actually going to be receiving Syslog data from other systems, maybe other Linux systems or your firewalls and so forth. So again, we definitely refer to this as an agent, but it's also appropriate to think of it as a general purpose collector of data, whether that data is local to the server or whether it's coming in through Syslog or an API or what have you. So I'm going to install my first agent. I'm going to select Linux because that's where I'm installing it, and I'm going to hit next. I'm going to zoom in here so you guys can see this a little bit better. Really simple installation script. We literally are going to copy and paste this into our Linux server. But I want to point out two important things right off the bat. Adnan talked about the op-amp protocol. And so when we're installing this collector, we need to tell it two important things. One, where's that op-amp server? So it can reach out and make that connection. And then what's the shared secret that they're going to use to authenticate that request? All right. There are other things that we can include here, like labels. We can also set an initial configuration, but for this demo, we're going to keep it simple and just go with the standard installation. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to hop over to my Linux server. And I'm going to paste it here and run this. And put in my password. Awesome. It's going to download the Bindplane binary from GitHub, and it's going to install that package on this machine. It is possible to download the package ahead of time and point the installation script to it. But in our case, this machine has internet access. It can reach out to GitHub, so it pulled down the package automatically. If I switch back over to Bindplane, that collector agent is already connected and ready to go. So again, just that quick, now we've got our first collector up and running and ready for a configuration. At this point, it's not doing anything. It's sitting there waiting to be configured. So our next step is set up that first configuration. I'm going to go here. And real quick, I'm going to start some data flowing from some scripts I've got so that we've got that ready. So let's create our first config. We're just going to name it Syslog servers. The platform is Linux because that's where we installed the collector. Just to note, because I went a little fast earlier, the collector can be installed on Windows, Mac, Linux, Kubernetes, OpenShift, so all of the standard platforms you would expect. And we'll hit next. And we're going to add our first source. So this is where we're going to collect data from. And again, This could be data local to the server that it's running on, but in our case, it's actually going to be Syslog data that's being sent to this collector, or pushed into the collector. We've got a lot of out-of-the-box sources. We certainly don't have time to go through all of them, but I would call out that even if something you're interested is not in this list by name, we can often accommodate it using one of the more sort of general purpose sources. And what I mean by that is things like the file source. So that can pick up any file log data. Or and we're going to use this one here in a second, the TCP and UDP sources. Again, these are great general purpose. Most networking equipment is going to be able to send some form of syslog message over a TCP or UDP connection. So even if they're not in the list, we can likely still support it. Now, I've already mentioned we're going to be pulling in syslog data. So you might think, Denton, why wouldn't you select the syslog source for that? And that's a great question. The short answer is because we're sending this data to SecOps, we actually aren't interested in fully parsing that message. We actually want the message to remain unstructured going into SecOps. And the syslog source by default wants to parse that data into separate fields, right? So we're going to select TCP logs here. And some of this will make more sense as we get in here and start looking at the data. So if that didn't completely make sense, just hold tight. We'll get there. So we need to give it a port to listen on, right? Again, this collector is acting as a listener, right? A receiver. So it's got to listen on a particular port for that syslog data. And I'm going to give it a type here just to identify this data. So the first set of data that we're going to pull in is actually Linux syslog messages. All right, so we're going to call those Nix system. Again, that'll make more sense here in a minute. Everything else we can leave alone. We're not going to parse that data, as we talked about. So no multi-line. These are all individual one log message per line. We're also going to not enable TLS, but know that it is fully supported. So if you've got encryption requirements in your local network, we can fully support that as well. And we'll also give it just a quick description because we're going to end up adding 2 of these. So we want to make sure this one's clear. So we've got everything in here. It's listening on 0.0.0.0, 5140. Let's hit save. Hit next. Awesome. And again, our actual end goal is to send this data to SecOps. It wouldn't be much of a SecOps webinar. But for now, we're going to start with our dev null destination. And this lets us look at the data, get a feel for it, reformat it, make sure it's good to go before we start sending it off to SecOps. So this is certainly not a requirement, but I would say a best practice. We're going to give it a name and just call it dev null and hit save. And we hit save. Awesome. We've got our first data pipeline configured. It's not attached to any of our collector, any of our agents, but we've got the sort of structure in place. We've got our source and we've got our destination. So let's go ahead and add this to our collector that we've already installed. We hit apply and we can see that collector is connected. And we're going to roll this configuration out. Awesome. And we're going to do one more thing before we go any further, and that is to enable our V2 configurations. So as you'll see, this is still in beta, but we highly recommend anybody who's building out their configurations take a look at and give the V2 config a try. There's a lot of benefits here. We don't really have the time to go into all of them, but trust me, when I say that it does provide a lot of flexibility and functionality that wasn't in the sort of original V1 config. And you'll see some of that as the rest of the demo goes along. So I'm going to go ahead and send that off. And now, if everything is working correctly, we should be able to see some data flowing here. Awesome. The scripts are working, data is flowing. So let's take a quick second here, because it's always easy to start moving fast and forget everybody doesn't know what I'm doing. These two nodes, as we refer to them here, are our processor nodes. This is where we can set up any transformations, data reductions, things like that, right? But the other really nice thing that these allow you to do is get a preview and snapshot of the data. And I want to call out, Adnan made this point, but it's one that's worth repeating. This does not mean the data is flowing through the Bindplane server. This data is not flowing through our SaaS instance. We are collecting a snapshot of the data. In this case, it was 101 recent logs, and we're showing that here in the browser. And we do that so that it's especially easy to then work with our processors to manipulate that data. And we're going to look at the dedupe in a bit. We've got parsing capabilities. We've got transformation and enrichment around adding fields, moving fields into different locations, and so forth. So having the snapshot and the preview here lets you see the impact of all of that transformation even before you've rolled those changes out into the production environment. Cool. So let's take a look at this data that's coming in. So this is from the TCP source. And again, this is Linux syslog messages, right? Like system messages. And because we told it not to parse this data, everything here is in the body of the message, right? The original log message is in the body of the message. And this is exactly how we want it for SecOps. Now, there are additional attributes that are automatically added by the TCP source. So information about the connection, we can actually see where this data is coming from, the peer IP and so forth. And then, of course, we can see our local host information as well. This data, by default, will not be sent to SecOps because we're going to specifically send just the body of this message. But sometimes that data can be useful that we can include with certain ingestion labels. But just wanted to call out the most important part is we have our raw log message here in the body. Now, anytime we are sending data to Google SecOps, there is one really important thing that we got to do, and that is set the log type of the data. And the easiest way to accomplish that is we're going to use the Google SecOps standardization processor. When we select this, this is going to basically tell us exactly what parameters SecOps is expecting and supports. And you can see the required field here is the log type. Now, if you're very familiar with SecOps, then you're likely very familiar with these different log types, right? And I just switched over to the Google documentation that sort of highlights all of the different log types here. So for our purposes, we're going to use Nix system, which is a great general purpose log type for any kind of Unix, Linux-based OS logs. So I'm going to grab this, hop back over to Bindplane, and put that in our log type. So again, Most important thing is making sure that log type is set. We also have two additional fields or types of fields that SecOps will accept. One is the namespace, and the others are a list of ingestion labels. We're going to actually leave the namespace alone for now because in our particular case, there's really no need for it. For the ingestion labels, this is a great way of adding additional attributes like the host name of the collector, right? So that you know sort of where the data is coming from. You could even add the host name for the upstream system, right? So we've got our peer name here. We could even add that in as an ingestion label. For this demo, we're going to keep things simple, and we're just going to sort of make up an ingestion label called data center. I'm in Ann Arbor, Michigan, so I'm going to add Ann Arbor. If I needed more, I could certainly add more ingestion labels. And when I hit done and expand on the right side, so our preview side, we can actually see that it's showing us once this configuration is rolled out to our collector, it will add these attributes to each of the messages. So again, really easy feedback loop here. We know exactly what to expect before we ever roll this out. Awesome. I'm going to hit save. And I'm going to go ahead and roll this out. And right now, we're in a really good place. We've verified the data looks the way we expect it to, and we made sure that the log type and the ingestion labels are configured. So now we're ready to go ahead and add the SecOps destination. So let's click New Destination. We're going to select SecOps. Awesome. We got to give it a name, so we're going to call it Web SecOps. And we've got a couple options here. We support two key protocol options. We don't really have the time to get into the difference between the two. This is highlighted in our documentation, but for the purposes of this demo, we're going to stick with gRPC, primarily because it's the quickest and easiest to get up and running. But there are some use cases where HTTPS might be required. But we're sticking with gRPC. This is the correct endpoint for our SecOps instance. And then the two things that we need to set up are the authentication, right? So that the collector can communicate with SecOps. And then we need to put in the customer ID so it knows exactly the account to connect to. So let's hop over to SecOps and get both of those things. Let's refresh to make sure we're good. So we can find those within SecOps. If we go to settings, oops, I knew it was going to log me out. No problem. All right, back in. So we're in settings and we're in profile, and our customer ID is right here. So let's grab that, copy it, back over to Bindplane, paste it into customer ID. So we're good there. So the only thing left is our JSON authentication. Let's go back over to SecOps, down to collection agents. So the easiest place to get this is to download this ingestion authentication file, right? So you download this, that'll come down, and I'm not going to open that up on screen, but if you're not familiar, it's going to look something like this. Let me make this a little bit bigger. So it's a JSON blob with a number of fields. Obviously, this one has been redacted, but it's basic. It will look like this when you open that JSON file. I've got it open over here off screen. I'm going to copy it back over to Bindplane, back over to credentials, and I'm literally just pasting that entire JSON blob into our credential field. Cool. I'm going to go down. We talked about this a minute ago, but to highlight, we're going to send a single field, specifically the body. So that's the important part here. And the rest of these can typically be left alone, but I want to highlight them again. Adnan brought them up earlier. We can set general purpose ingestion labels that apply to all of the data. We could set those here. We could also set the namespace again. We're going to leave the compression alone. We want the data compressed. And we're going to come down, and the ones I wanted to point out specifically were the retry, the sending queue, and the persistent queue. So as we mentioned earlier, all of these are enabled by default. The collector is designed to retry on any failures, and you can configure those values here. And it's designed to persist any data locally on disk when there are downstream failures. So if there was an issue reaching SecOps and the collector restarted or failed, all of that data would still be persisted locally to that collector. And again, all of these are configurable, but by default, all of that's enabled. Great. We've got all of our bits and pieces. Again, most importantly, our authentication and our customer ID. Let's hit save. Now, two more things, and we're going to start getting data flowing into SecOps. First, we always recommend adding a batch processor before sending data out pretty much to any destination. But this is especially true with SecOps. So oftentimes the defaults are going to be sufficient. And again, for the timing of this demo, we're going to leave them alone. What the batch processor is doing is sort of, as the name might imply, instead of sending each and every log message off as an individual request to SecOps, we're going to batch them up into a certain batch size based on these numbers, the timeout or the batch size, and then send that as a single request, which is a much more efficient way to work with SecOps. And again, with most destinations, that's going to be the case. Awesome. We've got our data flowing. We've got our ingestion labels and log types set. We've got our batch processor in place, and we've got our destination. So now we're going to come over here and we're going to connect this pipeline down to this destination. And we're just going to go ahead and disconnect the dev null simply because we don't need it in place. I'm going to roll this out. And if everything goes well, this should start sending data from this TCP source over to SecOps. We've got some more to show, but this is a great opportunity to pause and check in with Adnan and Travis and see how the questions and such are going. How's it going, guys?
Oh, it's going great. We have had
Awesome.
really, really cool questions and super interesting discussions here. I think so. One thing that I think might be interesting as well to bring up as a discussion point here as well is we had a fair number of questions about Bindplane Gateway. So
Okay.
we could take a second just to go through what it is, how it works, and essentially
Yeah.
how it behaves, because it's not really a big thing per se.
Yeah.
It's just a collector, again, acting as a gateway node for centralizing telemetry flow. So Denton, you can.
Yeah. I'm happy to, this is a very common question, happy to throw in just a couple quick talking points. So the Bindplane Gateway is a way to architect your environment. The way we have this configured right now, this collector is sending directly to SecOps, which means it needs to have network connectivity and credentials to reach SecOps. And maybe there's some reason why that's not ideal, right? Maybe from a network architecture perspective, or again, if you're wanting to limit the credential exposure in your environment. So what we could do is I could actually instead send this to the Bindplane Gateway. And I'm just going to give it a fake host name here because I don't have demo.com. I don't have this sort of set up and ready to go demo gateway, but it'll help sort of demonstrate this. And I'm going to save this. And the idea is I could then, instead of sending this data to SecOps, I would send it to a Bindplane Gateway, which is simply another collector, the exact same installation, the exact same software, running on another system, right? And typically we see those set up in a HA configuration. So it's probably multiple collectors set up somewhere else. And this data would instead be going to just that Bindplane Gateway. And then we would end up having another configuration with the gateway sending data to SecOps. So now only those gateway collectors need to know how to work with SecOps, right? The network connectivity and the authentication. So hopefully that's helpful. There's plenty more in our documentation and so forth. But yeah, great call out. All right, I'm going to hook all of this. Yep, go ahead.
Yeah, no, it was just an interesting discussion I've seen. So we had a bunch of questions on that, and specifically the firewall rules. So the outbound 443, you still need to do that for every collector, right? It doesn't really matter if it's an agent or a gateway per se, because to make sure that Bindplane actually sees what the agent is doing and can push updates to the agent, you still need to do that for every single agent. Doesn't really matter if it's a gateway or not. So that's also an interesting take.
Yep. Yeah, that is required for the management. So basically the fact that this agent shows up as connected in Bindplane, that's the mechanism or that's the port that control communication is going out. Okay, let's head over to SecOps and actually see if we've got some data flowing. So we're going to go over here and we're going to go to search. And if we look at this data, the server name very creatively is the host name is labeled server1. So that gives us a really easy thing to search on in SecOps. It's important to note, I am not a SecOps expert. Bindplane is certainly my area of expertise, but I can show you how we can do at least a simple raw search in SecOps to check and make sure that data is flowing. So I'm going to do raw equals, and then I'm putting in that particular server1 because I know that string exists in all of those messages. I'm going to set the last 5 minutes, hit apply, and hit run. We'll give it a sec to load. And again, we should see we've got a fair amount of logs flowing in our demo environment. So it takes a second to scan over those. But we should eventually see some data showing up with server1 in there. We'll just give it a second here. And any other questions while we're letting SecOps do its thing? There we go. Oh, never mind. Ignore that. We're continuing on. All right. So we've got some messages flowing. You can see right when they started, which is great. I mean, that's exactly when we sort of got that pipeline up and running. And if we click into here and we click on the raw logs, hopefully you guys can see it. This is exactly the data that we were sending. So perfect. Data is flowing. We've got our first source going from the TCP source over to SecOps. Fantastic. Awesome. We've got some more time, so let's do some more in the demo. I want to
one more question, Denton. Sorry for cutting you off.
No.
So one thing that's super interesting that I saw as well is that we had a question whether we can go through the TCP source settings one more time, just to walk through how that works. So are you collecting from a file? Is it like what's exactly happening there? So we can walk through that once more.
Perfect. I was literally about to set up another one. So great timing, Adnan. So I'm going to add a second source here because I'm going to use this collector to receive syslog messages from my Linux servers, but I'm also going to receive syslog messages from my Cisco ASA firewall. So let's add another source. Let's go right back down to TCP. So this is, let me actually go back here a second. So to your question, we could be receiving these messages directly from files, like local files on the collector. We perfectly support that. In this case, this is actually a TCP connection being made to the collector. So these other devices are Linux servers, our network firewalls. Those can open up a TCP connection to our collector. And that's exactly what we're setting up here. So I've got another computer here in my environment that is pushing out syslog messages to this collector. So we're going to continue to listen on the same IP address, the local IP address. And this time we're going to listen on a different port. So if you remember previously, we set it up as 5140. For these firewall logs, we're going to listen to 5141. And in this case, we're going to do Cisco ASA firewall. All right, we could name it whatever we want. This just happens to be the Syslog or the SecOps log type, so it's a good way to sort of keep that in mind. We're going to add that to the description as well. Everything else stays the same. We are not going to parse this data, and we are it's one log per line, and same deal, no TLS, default encoding. So now we're ready to go. Let's hit save. And again, it's really helpful having the dev null here. I can go ahead and connect this guy up to dev null, again, as a way of getting familiar with the data, checking it out, making sure everything looks good before I send it off to SecOps. So let's roll this out. Awesome. Collector's still running, everything's healthy, everything's good. This part of the pipeline is continuing to flow. And if I open up this processor node, awesome, we've got some new data flowing. It looks pretty similar because it's still a syslog-like message, but a couple of things are different here. One, these are firewall logs, so it's going to look a little bit different than Linux system logs. But there's another thing that you actually might notice, and that is the time zone of these logs is different than the Linux logs. So the Linux logs were actually coming in as UTC, which is exactly what SecOps wants. So that was perfect. We didn't have to do anything with that data. But in this case, these firewall logs happen to be in a completely different time zone. It's actually Pacific Standard Time, right? So 3 hours earlier than where I am right now. So that can end up making things a little more challenging in SecOps. So I'm going to actually show you how we can prepare these logs before sending them into SecOps. This is starting to get into some more advanced processing. So it's probably going to feel like a lot. We don't have a ton of time to go into this, but I think it's good so folks have an idea of the kinds of things that we can do. Right? So we're going to do this in a couple steps. The first step is I'm going to parse this data. Now, you're probably thinking, Denton, you said don't parse the data before you go into SecOps. Don't worry. We're going to put it back together. We're going to concat it before we send it to SecOps. So we're all good there. But to deal with this time and the time zone situation, I'm going to temporarily parse it into two separate fields. So I'm going to go with parse with regex. And I'm going to, the source, like where I want to parse the data from, is going to be in the body. And then I'm actually going to send this data right back to the body. So I'm going to replace this message with two fields. Now, I am not going to write this regex live. I'm going to copy it and paste it. It's not complicated, but nobody wants to write regex live on a webinar. And so I'm going to, real quick, it's breaking this into two collection groups. And I want the timestamp, which is a couple characters, a couple spaces, a digit or two for the date, 4 digits for the year, 2 for the hour, minute, second. And then everything else is going to be the log, right? It's basically, I could just call this everything else. And if I hit done and I expand this, now we can see this message is now 2 parts. Everything else and the timestamp. Now we can work with that timestamp, right? So if I come in here and I'm going to add a processor, and I'm going to, this is going to be a custom processor because I'm going to actually do 2 things at once in one processor here. So I'm going to select custom. Again, we're definitely getting into more advanced processing, but none of it's complicated. I'm going to walk through exactly what the code is going to do here. Once again, I'm going to copy this, paste it into our window. And let me shrink this up a little bit so we can read it. And I'm going to make it just a bit bigger. Okay, so here's the deal. We're going to do, and this bit of code here is called OTTL, OpenTelemetry Transform Language. So a lot of this is what's happening under the hood when you're using some of our out-of-the-box processors, like the copy processor or the add field processor. All of those out-of-the-box options are all doing some amount of OTTL under the hood. In this case, we're going to interact with that OTTL transform language directly. And what we're going to do is parse that time field, the TS field, but we're going to tell it what time zone it's in, because the collector has no idea what time zone this data is coming from. So we're going to tell it, yep, this happens to be Pacific time. And then once it has parsed that, we're going to concat that time back to the log message, right? And we got to tell it what format we want that time in. So we're going to put it right back into the original format, month, day, year, hour, minute, second. Let's hit done. And if we're back here, awesome. So now if we compare these two, we can see everything's back in the body, so we're good, right? No concerns there. But we've updated the time zone of our timestamp. And so originally it was saying 08:53:25. Now it's 16:53:25. That's exactly what we want. That is UTC formatted, perfect and ready to go for SecOps. Awesome. Now, oops, not bigger. Let's go smaller. We got to do our most important one. All this is great. Time zone's good. But if we don't add our log type, SecOps is going to have no idea what to do with this. Let's add our processor. Let's go to SecOps. All right, we're going to add a log type here. And these are our Cisco ASA firewall. Again, this is in our list here. If we go back over to our log types, we've got Cisco ASA firewall. It's exactly what we want. Paste it in here. Once again, we're going to leave the namespace alone. Our particular situation doesn't need a namespace. But we'll go ahead and stick with our data center. And we'll do, let's do San Francisco, right? Just keep it simple. Data center, San Fran, because we know these are Pacific time zones. Let's hit done. And if we expand this, once again, we can see those attributes are being added. We've got our ingestion label. We've got our log type. Our time has been updated. Everything's back in one single message. This looks great. Let's save it. But right now, it's still going to dev null. So we've verified our data. Everything looks good. Let's connect this guy up to our SecOps destination. Let's go ahead and disconnect this one and roll this out. And everything's still good. The collector's healthy. The data is flowing. And boy, we don't have a whole lot of time left. So I'm going to pause here while that data is getting into SecOps. How are we looking, guys, on the questions and such?
We are perfect.
Nice.
Yeah, we had 2 final questions that I just marked will be answered live, and you literally just answered them live.
Fantastic.
So, yeah, we are on the money, as you would say, yeah.
I would indeed. Okay. Awesome. I'm going to throw in one final processor in here just so everybody knows it can happen. Again, I know we're moving quick. I'd love to have more time with you all to really dig into each one of these. But again, we really want to show what's possible so that you know how to look some of this up after the fact. So this is looking great. Let's confirm that we are seeing that data. Let's go back into here. Similar to server 1, we've got a common string here that's in all of these. Let's go back over to SecOps. Let's change this. Let's change this to 5 minutes, apply it, search, give it a sec here. So we're going to wait and let those pull up. But what I wanted to show is I'm going to show how we can deduplicate these logs. And I know we've got 3 minutes, so it's going to be super quick, but it's really easy. And specifically, I'm going to focus on the firewall logs. Everybody knows firewall logs tend to be really chatty. It's a great opportunity to dedupe and reduce that data. I'm going to open up our processor here. And the piece that makes this possible is the fact that we did that initial parsing. So we split that log into a timestamp and everything else. And why that matters is the thing that's going to be that's going to be the same is everything else, right? Of course, the timestamp is going to keep changing, but this part is what we want to deduplicate on. So I'm going to add another processor here. I'm going to select deduplicate logs. I'm going to give it a condition. Let's just say every 5 seconds. So it's going to wait 5 seconds, collect up logs, then send a single log per unique entry. And I'm going to exclude body.timestamp. If you remember, we parsed it into 2 parts, timestamp and log. I don't want deduplication to pay attention to the timestamp, so I'm going to exclude that field. Everything else should be the same. Advanced, we can leave alone. So we've got our interval, we've got the attribute name, we've got our excluding field. Let's hit done. And I'm going to slide this right up here. Yes, after we parse the data. So we're parsing it, then we're deduplicating it, then we're fixing the timestamp and putting it back together. And then we're going to tack on those log types and ingestion labels. I'm going to hit save, and I'm going to roll this out. And that's it. We've now just in 2 minutes added deduplication to this pipeline. Depending on your firewall logs, that could very dramatically decrease the amount of data and logs that you're sending over to SecOps. There are ways that we could actually get that log count so that you know exactly how many messages were deduplicated. We could add that log count as a ingestion label so that it actually makes its way into SecOps. But we definitely don't have the time to do that today, but know it's possible. If we switch over to SecOps, perfect way to end. We've got our Syslog, our Cisco Syslog data flowing into SecOps. I'd call that a success, guys. What do you think?
Beautiful. Beautiful. This is perfect timing for that as well to do some final words and just say that we have a bunch of cool things coming up as well. So to not keep you any longer, what I do want to show you just is that we have 2 more webinars or workshops coming up very, very soon. We have the community call coming up on March 12th, where you can just jump into bindplane.com/community call to join there. There are no registrations needed, so you can just jump in once we go live. And then we have on March 19th, we're planning to do an OpenTelemetry deep dive workshop, primarily focusing on the collector. So much of what we were discussing here today, but we're just going to be focusing on the OpenTelemetry Collector. And if you want to register for that, you can jump in. It's at /webinar/ yeah, I'm just going to share this in the Slack community, by the way. So you should jump into the Slack community if you haven't already. And yeah, stay tuned for that. And yeah, on behalf of myself and everybody at the team, super happy to have hosted the webinar. And yeah, let's see you again in March for another one.
Awesome. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. See you guys.
See you guys.